Boom. Welcome to the fine print, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Caleb Teskey, and today I'm joined by Justin Massie from Low Key Alchemy Consulting. Justin, we're going to try this again. Had a little connection problem, but it looks like you're in a much safer space there with the fridge and
I
the
believe
rack.
so, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, much emptier space, not as
Yeah.
comfortable, but we'll work through it.
Cool. Well, it sounds good so far. Would you mind sharing a little 5-minute life story with us?
Yeah, I'm a solventless hash maker by profession, but I originally started out as a glass maker. That was the first way I could get in contact with like the cannabis plant in a legal manner. Because at the time I was living in New Hampshire, not an easy thing to do, really. I think, as we all know. Originally from Haverhill, Massachusetts, but like I said, I very quickly moved in my teen years to New Hampshire, and we spent quite a few years there being ostracized and criminalized for cannabis usage. New Hampshire is actually really impactful because in high school I contracted Lyme disease there, and started this whole
From a tick bite or something?
Yeah, it could have actually been earlier. I pulled one out of the top of my head once in middle school, and then one on the back of my neck in high school that I still have a mark. Like there's this sort of risen spot that's been there for the past decade or so.
Damn.
So in New Hampshire, I contracted Lyme disease. I ended up with all these really terrible symptoms, ranging from neurological to physical pain, to depression and anxiety. And the only thing I could really find to help immediately was cannabis. I discovered it recreationally with my friends, I think like most people did. And it just instantly, like, it normalized things. As I said before, you like the quote, it reduced inflammation in my feelings, like it really did. It solved a lot of those invisible problems that people deal with. And
so that was about a decade ago when you got Lyme disease?
Yeah.
And you've been using cannabis since then.
Only cannabis.
What else did they try to put you on any other drugs to treat that?
I was too late in catching it. Doctors tried to pass it off as anything they could. When I first contracted it, they just said I had mono and passed it off as that because it looked pretty similar. They're like, all right, you're a teenage boy, you got mono. So I pretty much just sat in a chair in pain for like 3 weeks. And I think my body just adapted to a degree. And it seemed like I got better, but I didn't ever really get better until I started using the cannabis. And then luckily enough, at one point, a friend of mine whose mother is a Lyme disease specific physician saw me, and she was just like, dude, like, you have Lyme disease. She tested me and all these things. And that helps because we did try some herbal protocols, but nothing really stuck. And at a certain point, if you don't get antibiotics soon enough, they don't do anything but really cause you harm.
Right. So you need to catch that really early, right? And then
it's called a Herxheimer reaction, actually. The spirochete, the thing that carries all these different diseases, or that is all these different diseases, they're called spirochetes, reacts very strongly to the use of antibiotics, and all of your symptoms flare up. So in order to treat it, you've got to essentially be useless. And I mean really useless. You can't do anything. Lifting up a coffee cup is like doing a bench press.
Wow. Is that bad, huh?
Yeah. It's far easier for me to spot treat daily with cannabis than it is to actually treat my Lyme.
Huh. And you also mentioned that you've had your shoulder severely damaged. Is that correct?
Yeah. That one happened in high school in New Hampshire as well. Longboarding initially. But that injury happened over and over and over again. As I'm sure anyone who's dislocated their shoulder knows, once it happens once, it's a lot easier to happen the second time. So my whole entire process has been pretty much designed around working with a single arm, and oftentimes completely solo with a single arm.
And that is a great note. I'm really curious. We could just do that right now. I mean, how do you set up a lab to function with one arm?
Automate everything you can is really the key to it all. The majority of people doing ice water hash are doing a hand washing method using oftentimes fruit trash cans, but they're stainless steel cans, a paddle or a whisk, and this constant stirring motion using the motion of the water and the temperatures of the ice to knock off the trichome. But obviously I couldn't do that. And I was starting off in hemp, so our scale was pretty big right off the bat. So first I tried all these 20-gallon washer combinations. They're a plastic washer a lot of hash makers use. They kind of suck. And I thought it was going to be an answer, and it wasn't. I just kept buying them, breaking them, buying them, breaking them. They couldn't really stand up to the workload, and it was still a decent amount of effort to pull it out. So what I ended up doing was designing my own machine, step by step, using mostly brewing equipment. I started by initially getting a mash tun, which is used to produce whiskey and beer and all sorts of things. And it's a great mixing tank in general, but it has a manway located at the bottom of it. So to start, I never have to reach in the machine to clean it out. Everything comes out the bottom, and gravity completely assists. The next step in the process was I went on this still ongoing research process with pumps and what pumps and pumping methods are trichome safe, because we're spending all this work and time to make this really clean hash. And this is a part people forget about a lot, is how is it getting from point A to point B? What is the method of transfer? So I ended up on what's called an air operating diaphragm pump, which is really massive game changer because everything is on the floor. After this point, I don't have to lift anything up. I don't have to lift a reservoir up onto something, from the agitating vessel all the way into the next huge difference in operating on scale was very expensive. It took me a while to save up for this, a vibrating sifter. So we don't actually handshake the bags anymore. Everything runs through that trichome safe pump up into the vibrating sieve, which is this flat metal screen with a 1 horsepower motor on it, just shaking the shit out of it, essentially multiplying the surface area by an exponential amount. And then it runs back into the machine. So you just collect the hash itself, as well as obviously having automated agitation on it so that we don't have to do the hand mixing.
So you just push a button and it shakes it for you.
Yes. And at this point, the major thing in hash making, once you get to the right setup, is observation. You know, your job as the hash maker is to make sure everything goes right. But realistically, you want to stay out of it as much as possible. And I've taken that to kind of the nth degree.
Before we get into too many of those details, what license are you trying to get here, Justin?
Tier 2 solventless manufacture, mostly product manufacture for concentrates as well as some blended products. We have another line that'll be the Luna Chill line. That'll be a lot of herbal blended products and purposely blended with CBD. And then our Low Key Alchemy line, which will be more high-end concentrates, rosins, hashes, our recombinations and vape carts.
And you're also doing some consulting?
Yeah, that's how I make my money right now, is I do consulting for various hash making equipment companies, R&D, hash makers, you know,
cool.
all across the country, Canada, Mexico.
No shit.
Yeah.
That's awesome.
I'm fairly silent about it, but you get a good group of guys who really want to learn. It's a really fun process, honestly, coaching them through it.
And how has the application process gone for you, Justin?
It's not that bad. I've got a very competent team. My wife Hope and my partner Adam are both much better on the paperwork side of things. I'm the chief scientific officer for a reason.
It sounds like it. Yeah.
I work better in experiments and process than
no doubt
those portions.
Are you working with a legal team? Do you have a legal team? No, you guys are you're freeballing it.
Yeah, I feel most of it is in pretty plain language, you know, with a little bit of effort. You know, you can read anything, right?
So you guys, have you stayed on top of the legislation and the board meetings and things of that nature?
Yeah, I know I personally am kind of checking in an OCD manner every day, what you post, City Vermont, everything on the board, check what meetings are going on, read through the guidance to see if anything changed and just make sure that it's fresh in my head and things like that.
And there has
which
been
a lot should be doing. It's a study for the test, right?
And there has been a lot of changes, man. How is it trying to stay up with this kind of constantly changing landscape here?
Well, I'm really used to that. That's what hemp was. Hemp, to have a working hemp processing business, especially, the name of the game is pivot. What's popular changed constantly, and the strict set of parameters I put on myself to be only solventless just made that harder. So, people moved over to water soluble. That was a big thing. CBDA was a big thing. What works in the cannabis industry is constantly evolving. And like right now, especially in the solventless world, we're in the renaissance of it. So like the name of the game is pivot. So why did kind of a place I'm comfortable
in. Why did you make that decision to go the solventless route?
Personal choices, really. It's my preferred medicine. And in my personal opinion, it's the most superior version of a cannabis product, and at least what I'm going for. And what I'm going for is really specific. I want the absolute expression of the plant in the most desirable way possible. And the solventless process is really physics process, and the mechanical separating process is about removing desirables from non-desirables. And that's what it comes down to. And a lot of the other processing methods can't do that to quite the same degree while keeping everything intact and keeping it as desirable as it is. You can make BHO incredibly clean, but at a certain point, you're sacrificing terpenes and flavonoids, certain bodies in the flavor, and the expression of all of it, the terroir, as it's called.
Yeah, that's a new term that's been kicking up, though. I've had to get in touch with.
Definitely a French economically inspired term, very famous, recently passed hash maker.
Now, not to go back a little bit, but you also said you may be treating a little bit of PTSD with your cannabis use. And I was wondering if maybe the solventless extracts give you a better treatment sort of than a BHO or something like that in terms of treating your own symptoms.
Yeah, so that goes back into one of the many reasons I love solventless, because that's an experience, right? A fine hash is truly an experience. Getting a distillate vape cart with Fruit Loops terpenes in it is not an experience. It gets you stoned and it might taste good, but a fine hash is closer to a fine wine or like a starred restaurant meal. You feel it in your face.
I love smoking hash.
It has a character, and everyone's hash has a different character. If you have 3 hash makers all work from the same pile of biomass and they're all great hash makers, they'll all be great hashes and they'll all be different. How people work with it will absolutely change it. We're kind of archaeologists. You just preserve what's there, and we all do that differently. But that whole experience of it, I find, is just one of the best things for PTSD symptoms, and dealing with what I have to deal with, which is a lot of issues with driving a car and just being around police in general, even though I live in a legal state, which is ridiculous, which is something I tell myself. But that full face melting, oh my God, experience of a full melt hash rip just takes me out of any of my mental problems just right away. And I'm into this world where I'm just focusing on the flavor and the experience and the whole of it. And, it takes me away.
I concur. I've had my own really terrifying experiences with cops, and it can fuck you up, man. Personally. Anyway, I was hoping you would also sort of walk us through maybe the history of making extract. This is kind of a new phenomenon. I know it's not totally new, but back in the day, we smoked a bowl, we smoked a joint. Now we've got diffused glass bongs with percolators, and we've got vaporizers and dab rigs and all these extracts. Would you mind maybe walking us through a little bit of the history here of making extracts?
Yeah, for sure. And it's an interesting thing too, how you mentioned the glass, because they were so correlated as one thing came out. I can't tell you how many styles of rigs exist because it's easier for the glass blower and things like that. And then that popularizes that, and then product manufacturers have to work towards that. It's
And
very
you were a
self-made.
glass blower, so
I
that's
was a
an
glass
interest.
blower.
Oh
So
boy.
I saw a lot of these things personally, more than I could ever probably list or remember.
Yeah,
But yeah,
that's
we'll
an
start at
excellent correlation there. No.
I guess, so I just looked this up to be sure. The oldest cannabis sample, which I was fairly sure was a concentrate, was found 2,700 years ago in a Chinese tomb. It was on a Caucasian body, so that's quite a distance traveled, and it was used in a ceremonial purpose. So it's safe to say the usage there, in combination with the fact that this man came from 7 to 1,300 miles away, something like that.
Somewhere where white
Probably
people live.
much older than that.
Yeah.
Much older than that.
Wow.
And then obviously it made its way into the Middle East, somewhere in there. And that's where the first dry siftings, I'm pretty sure, happened. Really the first hashes, and those techniques using screens and just working the plants against them to collect trichomes lasted for a really long time, until the 70s and 80s. Somewhere in the 80s was the first ice water extract that I think anyone's been able to track down. One alleged one before, but I have.
Oh, you're breaking up. Boom. Sorry, Justin, we're having a little more connection issues here, but you were walking us through sort of the history of making hash, and I was hoping we could pick it right back up there on that note.
Yeah, so I believe we were at the 90s. So this is when the first commercialized ice water hash bag came onto the market, which was pretty cool. Again, I'm pretty sure the first place you get it was High Times, but there was a site, and still is, Fresh Headies, where you can still go get bubble bags. Same one, same thing. They call it the OG now due to its age at this point. But that was really cool. So that gave us the first standardization of micron sizes, which was 25 microns, 45 microns, 73 microns, 120 microns, 160 microns, 190 microns, and 225 microns. And that's pretty much like a hash is always going to be one of those measurements.
And didn't you
based
say there was
purely on that.
Didn't you say there was a guy named Bubble Man or something who invented the bubble bags?
Bubble Man, who at least popularized the term bubble hash. I think the term bubble used in relation to hash is a much older thing, because it is, that's the market quality. If it doesn't bubble, it's not worth the trouble.
Yes, you got to have some clever rhyme schemes like that for your products.
So not much changed from 1990 to 2001, 5-ish. And at that point, I think is really when the primitive solvent market started to come into play. Early open blasting alcohol extracts, before any major commercialization. And not much change in solventless, aside from hand washing and a couple different companies, knockoffs really coming out for bubble bags, up until about 2015, where on, again, Bubble Man's show Hash Church, they showed somebody using a hair straightener to squeeze the oils out of a bud, which to me and my friends was absolutely fucking mind-blowing. I remember one of my friends, Sam, messaged me about it. It's like, go watch Hash Church. Went and watched it, and we went right upstairs, into the house we were staying, into the bathroom, grabbed a hair straightener out of it, broke it in 2 hours, had to go get another one, and started there. within a year, I want to say the first rosin press came out. No one was really, people were pressing hash, but there was a common idea that you couldn't press hash because micron bags hadn't come out yet. A couple of guys were doing it with coffee filters. There are probably still people doing it with coffee filters. And then specific micron bags for pressing in the rosin press that could handle the pressure came out. And then after that, it was just a landslide. Actual, companies popped up. My friend Sam started Salmon Falls Solventless. And, the same person who had messaged me about the hair straightener, pressing flower rosin in his kitchen to begin with, which is now a very impressive high quality company over in Maine. That was one of my second experiences with rosin, was packing the micron bags in his kitchen of flour and seeing how much we could press out, which was incredibly ineffective, really hard to do. After that, the concept of rosin and hash really started to intermix, and like commercial ice water hash is coming into play now, literally now. So like between 2018 and now, the concept of the hash machine has rapidly evolved, scarily evolved, from these 20-gallon washers that you can pick up at a hardware store to specified devices like mine, or one of the companies I represent, Sambo Creek, for R&D, has a super specialized self-sifting machine.
Do you have a weird test kitchen that you're working in?
What do you mean by that?
Well, you said you're doing some R&D, so I assume you guys maybe have a little lab somewhere where you just try out new techniques and things like that.
Yeah, well, I just did it here. Thankfully, with hemp, it's really cheap and on scale. So I was just kind of in a position where there's not a lot of people making ice water hemp extract. Let me tell you that to start, which is a large part of its value, but also it doesn't cost much to fuck up. So we could test out a new pump. It's not the end of the world if this pump absolutely shreds those trichomes. It's a shitty day of cleaning, for sure. And you're a little bummed about getting a bad result. That's science, is trial and error. Fuck around and find out, so to speak.
That's all science is.
Yeah, it really is. So yeah, it's enabled us the opportunity for product or equipment manufacturers to send us stuff and try out and see, hey, how does this work in the reality of it, outside of the computerized models and things like that. Because that's the other point, is these hash machines and equipment companies are getting to the point of doing computerized models and projections and things like that, and having actual physicists and engineers work on their devices. So we went from a hair straightener 7 years ago to getting computerized diagrams of the fluid dynamics of the impeller against the trichomes. Like, it's crazy.
And I took fluid dynamics in college.
Well, maybe you could be of help here.
Hey, I do have a physics degree. You said, I believe that a lot of solventless extraction processes aren't scaled beyond home use. Is that correct?
Yeah. Well, yes and no, because obviously there's this big renaissance I've been talking about.
Sure.
But there is a massive gap in between working at scale and working at home. There's not much in the range of, say, 35 to 75 gallons of like modest, a farmer could probably have this as like a very partial part of their setup and not worry about using it more than once or twice a year, versus like the 5 and 20 gallon setups where even using that scale once or twice a year really sucks. And then there's the kind of scale I'm on where you got to use this stuff every day. And it's a very easy process, but cost wise and just what the equipment is and the space it takes up, you got to be using it.
And how much space does it take up, if you don't mind me asking?
Probably about 12 square feet for my whole machine. Can take about 25 pounds of biomass
Per day?
Probably get 2 runs in a day, but personally, I like to do one part of my process a day. we touched on this a little bit, but remember, I'm an okay grower.
We
There's a
did.
reason
No,
for
that's in my
that.
notes.
I'm really good at focusing on something for a very short or specific period of time. And I can act in that 24 hours, great, or that week, great. But 3 months of a project, and I hate that project. So I've tried to make things very efficient. Something I stole from my glass blowing career is the concept of volta, um, which is an Italian term to mean be efficient and beautiful in your action. And that's what glass making is, because you have to be very efficient. Glass cools down very quickly. It's very hot. It's very dangerous. And you're making art. So everything you need to do needs to be beautiful and efficient. So the actions tend to be fairly elegant, as well as ideally the result.
Mm, mm. Look at this. We're gonna rip through. I got a bunch of. I'm sorry. I have to read some because your notes got like kind of nerdy that I didn't remember because you're
I've been known to say nerdy things.
No, I know. Let's talk about the THC caps, maybe. Let's just do that.
Yeah, and there's a lot we can go down into. So you want to start with some specific shots at that, maybe?
Sure, man. I have so many notes from you. They're just a little disjointed. And so maybe we're going to bounce around a little, but we got lots of time and let's do the THC caps.
The THC caps are such a silly thing, really. I think it's downright absurd, especially in my perspective, that a mental health group is the one who lobbied for this. The effects of a high concentrate or high THC concentrate product versus flower are no different. This is a usage thing. A hash user or a rosin user isn't going to necessarily get higher or use more than a flower user or an edible user. We use to our, we salt to taste, right?
Well, but like if you smoke a joint, that's fine. You smoke a joint of some 15% flower, but like if I just want one hit of like an 80% extract, isn't that kind of comparable?
Yeah. I mean, honestly, it really is.
I made those numbers up, but like a hit of a nice hash rosin isn't going to be any worse than smoking a joint.
I mean, it probably takes about a joint's worth of flour to make a hit of hash rosin.
Sure. So it's
when you're looking at it that way. So it really is. The term concentrate really throws things off. So yeah, we're concentrating, but really we're just trying to remove everything that actually is bad about it. A properly made concentrate is removing all of the carbohydrates and plant matter and plant waxes and all these things that we definitely shouldn't be inhaling. Shouldn't really be inhaling anything, obviously, but when you look at these things isolated out, especially plant waxes, they're fucking wax. That's sticking to your lungs, you're looking inside of a bowl and there's carbonized matter, you're burning something. Generally inhaling smoke is carcinogenic. Like that's a bad thing. So for any kind of health group or department to have an issue with concentrates when in reality they are the healthiest way you can possibly inhale this product, it just shows a lack of research and that what they're going for is not public health. That's some power shit. They want a sense of control over this bill. They wanted their caveat. And I hope they know that they did it at the cost of patients and customers.
And how do you feel about that?
Well, I think I laid that out right now.
Okay.
But I disagree with it. However, there are absolutely ways around it. A lot of people don't understand that 60% is total THC, guys. A concentrate is mostly THCA. To get total THC, we multiply our THCA by 0.87. So when you do this with 70% THCA, you get 60%. Your average concentrate is 70% THCA. So this affects people far less than you think. The majority of really nice rosin is around 75, 76%. And there's a variety of mechanical separation techniques that the majority of solventless guys right now are already capable of doing, where you can separate terpenes from cannabinoids and reintroduce more terpenes, so less cannabinoids and things like that. I'm sure a lot of people are going to go with the cutting with CBD route because that'll be obviously the cheapest way to go about it. And I'm not necessarily opposed to that, but
I'm not either. I've smoked some blended carts with CBD oil. They're kind of nice.
yeah, all I'll say is if you're going to do ice water hash, loose resin, or rosin, and you plan on diluting your product with CBD, then I really hope you're doing it with solventless CBD. That's the only caveat. Keep the dignity of what this process is intact. Is my big thing there.
And
I'm
now,
really against cutting in general.
and now some of these machines, from what I understand, these sort of closed loop extraction machines are quite pricey. Is that right?
Yeah, there's no cheap extraction equipment. We get what we lovingly call the green tax, where they take something that already exists in another science or industry. For hash makers, it's mostly brewing equipment, and as well as some various like serial separation or just commercial separation equipment. They add 100, 250% to the price and then sell it to us with a cool sticker. Or the solvent guys, it's mostly just sanitary and tri-clamp parts being put together in a specific way, and following very strict protocols in terms of CLCE, I believe it is, fire safety, food grade qualities, things like that.
Did you say they're selling you marked up brewers equipment?
Oh yeah, fuck yeah. Cannabis is not honestly very different from many things aside from in the initial processing stage for me, with ice water extract where we're trying to knock off that trichome. That's a little weird, but even then that's pretty much exactly how you make beer, just hot. Hops themselves have a trichome that contains humulene and humic acid, which is part of why we like beer. If you like beer,
I don't like beer.
Well, that's why you don't like beer. That's what makes it beer.
I was a bartender for 7 years, and people will always ask me, "Wait, you don't like beer?" Like, no, I don't. It tastes like shit.
That's kind of reasonable. I sort of hate glass, being a glass blower for 10 years. It just comes with anything, right? But yeah, a lot of the processes in cannabis aren't special. Other companies make them special, particularly people selling things to the cannabis community. That's the green tax, extraction equipment, packaging, especially.
There's no packaging companies.
Jars, all right.
There's no packaging companies. Sorry to interrupt you, but there are no packaging companies in Vermont, are there?
Mansfield Provisions, I believe, is going to be doing that.
Oh,
right.
I haven't heard of them. Thank you. I hope so. I'll
Don't
reach
quote
out.
me. I mean,
I won't quote you, but it seems like this. It seemed like the state maybe jumped the gun on that with all these packaging restrictions, wherein there are no local packaging options, really.
That's a hard thing, man. That's a massive scale industry. Even in CBD, like I had to order stuff from overseas oftentimes, and
China,
Amazon or something like that.
What, vape carts and stuff like that?
Vape carts are actually very hard. There's 3 or 4 pretty like cannabis direct companies that are reputable, but really they're all ordering from the same 1 or 2 factories. So you're China. Still subject to overseas issues of waiting, quality control. We just don't know. There's so many varying degrees of lead in those products. Always overpay for your vape. If you're going to overpay for anything, overpay for
your vape. Okay. And this was, that's a great little segue there, because I believe this is one thing you sort of confronted me about, was something that was said earlier about pricing or something. And I wanted to give you a chance to maybe touch on that, because I don't remember exactly what it was, but I'm wondering.
Solventless concentrates in general are perceived to be just absurdly expensive, and that's the processor's choice or the whoever's doing the marketing's choice, and obviously the dispensaries do their markup. But there is no reason that a solventless concentrate can't be made at the same efficiency as a solvent-based concentrate. There are certainly tiers in terms of like raw flavor and quality. And if something is just a AAA extract, sometimes it deserves a price. But there is absolutely going to be affordable, high quality rosin on the market. And a lot of these concepts are derived from states that Vermont is nothing like. Vermont is not Massachusetts. Boston has more people than Vermont. So
Colorado.
There's going to be someone in that state that can pay that price. But we don't have that same demographic. We have a much different standard of living and a much different population. And like companies are going to have to work with that. Like none of us are just going to sell things that people can't afford, because then we'll all go out of business. Let's look at the reality, guys. Wow. You're the customers. You control this market.
Crazy. Like, you're talking crazy now, Justin.
Maybe.
Maine? Did you say Maine?
I said maybe I'm talking crazy, but Maine's an interesting
I'm sorry.
one.
I thought you said Maine. I was like, let's talk about Maine.
I think Maine's developing something of a flooding in the market.
Yeah. I think
from what I'm told by my friends over there, but they're all in the medical side of things.
Boy, that was a great point though, Justin. Man, I got lost in that point a little. We're going to back up and come to that. I got another one to do at 3, so we got to keep cruising. But we'll come back to that. I was hoping you would tell us about different types of tinctures as well, because that was something you mentioned before.
Yeah. I mean, there's pretty much 2 solid kinds of tincture when I look at it. There's a ethanol base or an oil base. I think the one thing I really wanted to bring out was that we were informed that the CCB changed their view on a tincture to not be an edible. So there's a lot of this complaint that we can only have 5 milligram dosages in our edibles, and that's going to be a massive hit to the market. But tinctures aren't going to be held to that standard, and we'll be able to have much higher amounts of THC. And if you need an edible version of THC, that's just a perfectly acceptable way to go. We're all over 21. If we're imbibing this, we're all adults. We can take our medicine, without it being in Pop-Tarts or gummies or what have you. So the option's there. And people should definitely think about that, because tinctures are an epic way to take your medicine. Oil-based tinctures especially can work topically, as well as subbucally. But yeah, there's definitely some options there that I don't think people are thinking about.
I do like the tinctures. It leaves out the sugar. For people that don't maybe necessarily want like a lot of sugar. Like I like gummies, but sometimes I just don't want to eat sugar. So, and a tincture is nice. Just a couple drops under my tongue, like boom.
Yeah, I'm like a 7-year-old when it comes to candy or gummies of any sort. I'm eating the bag, So I think the 5 milligram law is great for me personally. That's going to help save me a lot of trouble in my life. But to avoid that, I've personally mostly taken tinctures, as well as just having the option of going topical, because I've got a lot of pain, especially in my shoulder, obviously. I practically made them CBD.
Do you find that the topicals help with the shoulder pain?
Yeah, constantly. Yeah. So I tore my labrum. It's this tiny little muscle that holds the ball in. So it's pretty much just meat and stress that holds my shoulder in. So it makes a lot of tension in various spots of my body. So that helps me relax enough, but still be holding my shoulder in, where any painkiller I've ever tried led to a dislocation the next day.
Really? You've dislocated your shoulder off of taking painkillers?
Yeah, just by being too relaxed, and and it just slips. Yeah.
Huh.
So it's pretty constant, holding it in here.
Oh, boy, interesting. I've never heard that one before, Justin.
Yeah, when I say I make cash with one arm, I really mean it. I can make cash with one hand tied behind my
back. I'd love to come to your shop. We'll do that on tape.
Yeah, as soon as we're up and ready.
Can you talk to me about reconstructing concentrates without adding terpenes?
Yeah, the general method is definitely done at the rosin press, and a few other methods outside of there that are still kind of ever evolving. But the idea is that there are four main components to a concentrate, in my eyes at least. You have your aromatic profile, you have your flavorful profile, you have non-desirable waxes, and then you have your cannabinoid content. These all have different physical traits. So by using different pressures, temperatures, and even filters, you can separate cannabinoids from terpenes and waxes from cannabinoids, and rearrange them to different expressions of the plant. And they all have different levels of desirability. Like if you took a dab of just the wax fraction of one of my recombinations, you would probably never take a dab again.
That's how I felt after I took the first dab of my life.
You know that coating feeling a concentrate can give you in your mouth? That's the cutaneous waxes, as well as xanthophyll. Generally not chlorophyll. Pretty hard to actually get chlorophyll in an extract, or at least a solventless extract. Very easy to get chlorophyll in a solvent-based extract. Stop right here. Common myth: chlorophyll is not water soluble, guys. If it was, the world wouldn't work. A lot of people think that chlorophyll is water soluble for whatever reason, but plants would just bleed out all their green, and we would all go extinct. So just drop that one right there. But they cause this terrible bitterness and sticking feeling. And like if you take too cold of a dab out of a Puffco, you can get this pretty easily. Crappy vape pens, give you this feeling. A lot of that is the cause of dry mouth. Dry mouth might not necessarily be a THC only symptom. That's a lot of what we're inhaling. So being able to remove those portions and accentuate the sharpness or the depth of the aromatic profile and the flavorful profile against the natural traits of the cannabinoids just makes for this whole new rosin experience for me. I've been calling it rosin 2.0.
Where I'm not going to get the beak as much.
Oh yeah, absolutely. There's nothing. And the difference on a nail, so I'll take these really clean rosins and go through my process and remove the waxes. And it was already pretty clean on the quartz, but it's just, you could go as high temp as you want. There's nothing to carbonize. Everything evaporates. And you can change your ratio of terpenes this way, which is my favorite thing. So I'll generally go up in terps because I'm really big on the flavor. But it is crazy to see how much the aromatics are driving the bus on this whole experience, because you double the naturally existing terpene content in relation to its natural cannabinoid content and take that dab. And it's like you doubled the potency of it, really full facial flush, and an intensified version of whatever that high is. If it was that high sativa-esque racing feeling, you're really going to be racing. If it was that myrcene heavy indica lock, like you're really going down, and with a much more instantaneous kind of effect.
And so let me back you up a little, because you talked about some of these cartridges that taste like fucking Swedish fish and different candies. So they make the distillate, which is one of these sort of brewing process you're talking about, right? You run it through a still.
Well, that's just a standard distillation.
But then, they add these flavors back into the carts, and that is how it's like making Doritos, right? Like you add some flavor.
To me, it's Doritos. It has its place in its industry. No offense to the guys making them, but I will never smoke one ever again. Those pure isolated compounds get dangerous, honestly. If you look up the SDS on any pure terpene, they're fucking dangerous, man. They're all volatile solvents. A lot of them are carcinogenic past certain milligrams. And to get those insane, just like Swedish fish or Fruit Loops kind of flavor, they're like 7 to 8% of these really isolated compounds. So 7-8% in 1,000 milligram cart, that's a lot. You're getting into really notable dosage ranges. Whereas a naturally existing terpene content in a rosin or a hash is hundreds of compounds at like barely a milligram each, creating this whole family of effects. You're not, nearly taking a shot of terpenes to to imbibe it and get the flavor.
Hmm. Hmm. Boy, that's a great point right there.
Yeah, it's just too purified. Pure isn't always good.
Sometimes I feel like Joe Rogan when people say stuff to me. I'm like, I feel dumb now.
Well, no, you were recently uninformed about something. Now you learned. And
No,
you'll
man,
inform me about things.
dude, you have no much. The amount of information I've taken in the last 7 months has blown my mind. I thought that was a good time to ask you about. You mentioned there are some folks that make better hash making strains than other folks, and Muerta Genetics was one of them. Who is a guy, Luke was on the show a couple weeks ago, and I was curious what you had to say about that.
Yeah, Omerta genetics are fantastic. But as we move through breeding, guys like him are focusing on what's really important. The trichome is really everything in this plant. And past that, it's superficial. You're looking at the flower and the color and how the plant shape grows. All of that is secondary because in the end, everything we love about it is happening in this beautiful, magical super factory we call the trichome. And guys like Luke and a few other citizen geneticists are taking the effort to really breed in that direction.
David Lewis was another guy you mentioned.
Yeah, well, he grows a lot of Omerta genetics, which is where I learned about a lot of Omerta genetics. And it's one of those guys who pheno specifically for the right trichome and the right profile that's going to come off of that plant, and caters his method to take care of them. And you can tell, I mean, the guy's flower rosin outpaces a lot of people's hash rosin. That says a lot because I think flower rosin is kind of garbage. It's pretty gross. You're just like squeezing your oils.
Is this the live rosin or whatever they call it?
No, live rosin is chopping down a plant when it's alive and then freezing it and then immediately washing it from frozen state, which is considered, the best way to get the full profile of the plant from the monoterpenes, the earlier really volatile ones. Some guys are taking it a step further. Something I'm hoping to be able to do is fresh, never frozen. So never actually altering the enzymatic activity of the plant up until it's off the plant. It's still a living, breathing organism right up until it hits the ice water. So
farm to mouth.
Yeah. Yes. And thanks to, new technologies with lyophilization, the freeze dryers were able to remove water from the hash at 30 degrees is the temperature I do that. So it's really staying exactly as you left it, kind of thing.
You said strain selection is super important. And you said maybe some folks are using out-of-date strains. And,
don't be beholden to old names, guys.
And you said it's different growing for extraction versus growing for smoking.
Yeah. Well, yes and no. In the end, if it's an excellent ice water strain, it's just an excellent strain. It means it's got very large, bulbous, resin-filled trichomes that are filled with cannabinoids and terpenes, the reason why we harvest this plant. It's definitely a breeding aspect to get into that, but that's what cannabis was originally bred for en masse, right? So we've kind of, I think, gone backwards for a bit by just working on aesthetic, because for a very long time we didn't even know what the trichome was. The common slang was crystals. I think people actually thought it was like crystals of THCA growing on the plant.
Some of that was mold and we were just fooled because we didn't know shit.
Oh, it doesn't say that anymore, but even the micron gauge card used to say crystals. Now it just says prime gold. But
Let's jump to a new topic here, because this was something you touched on, was the social equity piece of this legislation that I was hoping to ask you about.
Yeah, I mean, I don't have the strongest view on this, more so than my wife does, who, as an indigenous Mexican lady, has had a very different experience in life. So I personally think it's fantastic. I think there are more things that could probably be done. I don't necessarily think that waiving a license fee of $1,000 to $10,000 is necessarily the biggest piece in this industry, but it's definitely a piece that happened, and I'm glad it did happen. And I'm impressed for the state, for taking this step. But I really think there's definitely more that can be done, and I hope that they flesh out more of this program. People who have had a completely different life experience than you and I, in the cannabis lens, people who have served time for cannabis, like, guys, you deserve a leg up, and I really hope you get that leg up.
Well, luckily I never did any time, but thank God.
Right, count your blessings. A lot of people did.
Coulda. Mistakes have been made. I want to ask you a little more about vape carts, man, and I'm curious what part you think they'll play in the market here, and I'm also curious about the manufacturing process of making sort of the distillate and loading it into a vape cart.
So just loading it in is done with sort of a heated syringe gun, or sitting machines that just have a heated base and sort of plow it in, because the distillate-based concentrates, especially with their higher denatured wax content, get pretty sluggish at room temperature. They don't move quite as well. I don't actually have that issue due to the way we do it. We separate the terpenes at this really low temperature, keep them, one, viscous, and two, intact, unoxidized, unchanged. And we get rid of those waxes, and then we decarb our DHCA. So that becomes that's 99% pure when we go through our decarb, versus a distillate, which is decarbing at like 70, 80% pure. That stuff moves like water. So we actually just fill it in a regular glass syringe, with hand pressure. But the filling aspect of cartridges isn't complicated or the biggest issue. The biggest issue is what you're cutting it with and the hardware you're choosing. It's really ever evolving.
Does it flow better before you cut it with the CBD oil, or does that help, or do you know?
CBD specifically is going to be interesting. It could crash out. CBD very happily crystallizes, but also mixing cannabinoids, they tend to break the lattice, as it's called, the shape that all of the molecules are taking based on how they're aligned. So THCA makes a very strong lattice. It's always likes to be crystalline. It's working.
Yeah, right. You mentioned that likes to crystallize.
CBD in its neutral form really likes to crystallize, but if you mix the two of them together, they interrupt it. The puzzle pieces don't fit together, right? So you can force them to be a liquid that way.
Huh.
It won't necessarily be runny, but it will probably be more likely to flow, especially with some mixing and some heating.
And I asked Grayson about this too, about the actual quality of the cartridges that you can buy. He said they're all from China.
As far as I know, there might be other overseas manufacturing, but there's definitely none in the United States or Canada or Mexico.
Damn. Yep. There's the dog.
So, I've tried a bunch of different of the branded companies. I just tried a whole round of the disposable battery ones, because I go back and forth between whether the larger separate battery or the whole cart as a disposable is better or worse. For the environment, they both suck. I don't think we're ever going to figure this one out.
I think you're right about that. I think they do both suck.
Yeah.
There's not a lot of good options. And then,
I would like people to buy their vape filling as a dart syringe, personally. Something that's done with RSO. And you guys could buy your own vape hardware and possibly reuse it, save us all some hassle, and you could avoid your 92% vape tax by doing this. Just saying. if you guys take that little bit of extra effort, the option's there.
Hey, baby. Sorry, Tasha just came on.
Hi, Tasha.
Hey, Tasha. She waved. She's taking the dog outside. Yo, that's a great idea because, it seems like the medical dispensaries are exempted from the vape tax, and that's going to make.
I wasn't aware of that. Of course they are.
So that's going to make it incredibly expensive, which was maybe the point you were trying to make about the cost, because we talked about this last time, was how much would a retail dispensary have to, if you have a 92% vape tax or whatever it is, it might be 93.
I think 92 is correct, but
right. So if you want to make 10
over 90,
bucks,
it's ridiculous.
Right. So if you want to make $10 off a vape cart, you're going to have to sell it for $100 or something, So
yeah, I mean,
I'm
the
wondering,
dispensaries might have to kind of just take a hit a little bit if they want to sell them, sadly. It's how much you want to cater to your customer basis. There's definitely going to be higher profit items. They'll make more profit off of edibles than they're ever going to off of vape carts, in my opinion, just based off of, common demographics. So it is kind of on the smaller end of issues, realistically, if we're looking at it spread out across the market.
you think so? The vape tax?
I think demographically, like for the people who are going to use a vape pen in comparison to if you use concentrates, I don't think you're going to buy a lot of vape pens.
What about college kids who live in Burlington, though?
I mean, support your local glass blower and go buy a nice rig.
Okay, cool. Yeah,
that's my advice.
Word up. That's good advice.
Yeah.
Okay.
Plus, it's going to taste way better, man. Cold start dab is, in my opinion, the ultimate way to taste a hash rosin.
I gotta agree with you. It kind of kills me sometimes, but it is the best way.
You got to try a cold start. I don't think we went over this. So everyone heats up their quartz first, generally, right? And then you put the dab in. I like to put the dab in the quartz and then gently heat it up. And what you get is this like layering, right? First, you get the super volatile monoterpenes and the fresh hit. And that almost kind of tastes like one of those fake vape carts. It's very, very clear distillation of it, early distillation pass kind of. And then you get into the heavier flavors, the gases and the fruits and lemons and the mints. And then once you get past that heavier second kind of flavorful breath, you move into mostly cannabinoids. And then you just keep cooking until you want to stop getting stoned. So you get your experience and then the efficiency part.
So I've also seen now that some folks are using a little laser reader. You heat it up and then you put the laser under there and wait till it cools down, because apparently we've been maybe torching our dabs.
Yeah.
At way too high of a temperature.
560 to 720 is kind of the range, depending on what your concentrate is. The higher the terpene content, the closer to 5. The higher the cannabinoid or THCA content specifically, the closer to 720. Because we have this like understanding of things decarbing and melting at like 220, right? It's very common temperature. Cookie brownies at 220, things like that. When you have a big chunk of just THCA, it doesn't melt the same. It takes a lot of energy to get through that crystal. So you need
right, because you said it crystallizes, so that means you have to burn it at sort of a higher temperature.
Yeah, the molecules are literally closer together and they can uptake more energy. THC is taking in energy to crystallize. That's part of the reaction. Trying to sap all the energy out of its environment.
I got another note in here. It just says nucleated versus non-nucleated, and that might have been a high note, but maybe you can explain that a little bit.
When you see a concentrate has a solid or crumbly or crystalline texture, we refer to that as nucleated, which is kind of correct, kind of not. Nucleation is a broad term for a particle hitting another particle and creating a structure and starting to grow. So creating a solid crystal in a specific formation. So concentrates are either nucleated or non-nucleated. So I found the initial distinction on solid and liquid concentrates to be a bit ridiculous because that doesn't make sense, right? That doesn't determine potency. That determines a ratio of acidic cannabinoids to non-acidic cannabinoids, delta 9 or THCA. You decarb your concentrate, it's delta 9. It's going to be a liquid no matter what. But I believe it ended up changing to be vape carts specifically could be over 60%, and they stopped using
they lifted the liquid vape limit, I believe, right? The
yeah
THC on liquid vapes, yeah.
Which is important, but nonetheless, if you have the fears of cutting on a liquid vape, why would you not have the same fears of cutting on a concentrate? What's the difference? The difference is hardware. So the difference isn't the health impact, the difference is hardware. So I felt there was a lack of logic there. Spock was not impressed.
Spock.
Yeah.
Word up. Can I ask you this? You talked a little bit about the integrated licenses, and you said single source is bad for the economy, I believe.
I genuinely believe the single source is bad for the economy. Like, spread out the work, go to different processors. Don't just come to me as an ice water extractor, go to other hash makers too. Like, have different guys make your pre-rolls, go to different edibles manufacturers. I want to work with lots of different growers. That's how you create a healthy and consistent environment here. But if we all try to do it ourselves, one, you're just not going to do a very good job. No one's good at everything. And two, you're just limiting yourself on what you could do, the collaborations that could happen, the ideas that could spring from new relationships. Like, why would you want to take that away from the meta?
And that's, I feel like that's something I've been saying all along, kind of, is like, we got to sort of work together. Otherwise, I don't know. There's been a lot of talk about these MSOs coming in and sort of taking over. And it seems like if Vermont growers are going to survive through this, that collaboration may be necessary.
Yeah, we need a united front here. If we all start picking a whole bunch of small teams, then the MSOs can just mow us all over pretty easily, right?
What do you think about Nick and Angela over at Forbin's?
Fantastic people. I don't think we got into that. Low Key Alchemy / Luna's O'Chiel is co-located with Forbin's. We are unlucky enough to have severe misunderstanding with our current location, and that it wasn't privately owned completely, that a federal bank had interest in it.
Which is a big problem, right? If you don't own your own building.
Yes, and I can't necessarily say it's a problem on the application side, but the bank themselves just gave us an outright absolutely not, which was terrible because we spent the past year and a half in this building, moving to it as an upgrade from a very small little building in North Bennington from the 1800s. And we moved into this, nice sort of manufactured garage style building and set it up. Did all the plumbing, put up new walls, sanitary metal shielding for the walls and everything.
So you put a bunch of work into that place.
And having to leave it was a real bummer. But really, I think it's well worth it in the end. Being able to cohabitate with anyone, especially a grower of that caliber, is just a fantastic start. We're really looking forward to the various collaborations we're going to be able to put out with them.
Anybody else in Vermont we should be looking out for here?
There'll be an announced company in the next coming weeks that I'm not allowed to say, but keep your eye out for. They'll be really important for, I think, everybody. I would say definitely go check out my wife's brand first. Luna's O'Chiel. She's on Instagram, does all sorts of cool CBD things, herbalism, and as well as some really good education on social equity issues across the board, not just cannabis.
I'd love to have her on. I'd love to have her on maybe and talk to her about it.
If she's pretty almost everyone you've interviewed already, I'd have to say, give a sort of blanket shout out to, because you guys are doing a great job.
Can I ask you about this, man? I got a couple more for you here, and I gotta check. But like you mentioned, this banking sort of catch 22 with your business where like you can't get a license before you have a bank account, but you can't get a bank account before you have a license. Have you dealt with like that
Yeah.
problem?
We ended up, so at first the CCB was telling us, as far as I know, to get a proof of denial. Basically that the bank said no, and that you're going to use a cash management plan. Then when we actually went to go get the proof of denial, we were given an email that says something along the lines of, we have a nascent program forming, and that once you've been given your pre-approval or something in the approval line, that we will start the process of opening up a bank account for you. So that's kind of changed a little bit. And it seems like there is a pretty direct route. However, I don't know how much there is for options. I'm on a time frame, so I'm not exactly hunting, you know. But there's definitely a little bit of a struggle, but it's straightened out quite a bit. It doesn't seem nearly as complex as it initially did.
Okay. Well, that seemed like a bit of good news.
Yeah, good news for once.
I love a
I
big
think
good
a lot of
news.
it's been good news, actually.
I got one more on here for you, and this was about maybe a clone that was brought to your home that maybe contaminated one of your grows. I was wondering if that was something we could talk about.
Yeah, my personal landlady at the time was, possibly still is, a medical patient. And she got
Where?
some clones in Bennington. So it's the Bennington dispensary.
Phytocare?
I believe so. Now, this plant was covered top to bottom in several different species of insects, not just aphids, not just spider mites, just multiple different species past the general ones I could immediately recognize. She had put them directly into her tent because she was not a practiced grower. And I went to check on them because it was sort of a thing I had been doing while living there. Not that I'm the growing aficionado, as we discussed. And I was just like, oh, fuck, we have to get this outside. Try to at least let nature maybe kill it. Maybe she can get an outdoor plant out of it. But it was way too late. My grow got infested incredibly quickly. And it took down, 2.5 months of work. That was the last grow I'm going to attempt for a very long time, personally. But there's just no reason why a clone should ever leave a dispensary like that. That's insane. That's greed. That is nothing but greed.
You would think
it's
that they
ineptitude. You guys are either being greedy or inept, and neither of those things are okay in the cannabis industry.
Especially at a medical dispensary where we're talking about maybe your patients have maybe respiratory illnesses or serious diseases where like a little bit you smoke some moldy weed or something like or infested with bugs like
Yeah.
that really kind of makes my blood boil a little bit, and I try to let it stay cool.
I don't think people should necessarily be like okay with it. So I've never personally been a medical patient. I use cannabis medicinally, but it is my opinion that the majority of those systems are kind of just scams. Patients aren't generally treated very well, and most people I know who use cannabis medicinally either go to the black market or end up just going to their legal market if that's a thing.
What do you think the state could do to encourage more people to get into the medical program?
Rearrange caregiver laws in a way that it's worthwhile to do. Being a caregiver to give care to one patient is not logistically feasible. These guys need to pay a bill. This does not happen for free. This costs labor hours, equipment, and it's not. That's not a system. That was a poor attempt at putting something together.
It seems like it's taking advantage of farmers again.
Yeah, I mean, if you could have some kind of space allotment, maybe that could be subdivided between your chosen number of patients or something like that, it would be a more effective system. People who are trying to go into a medical dispensary can't necessarily grow on their own. So improving home growing laws doesn't necessarily help.
What if the state used some of their tax-free properties to allow people to grow cannabis for medical patients?
I mean, that'd be pretty cool. That's a good start. I don't think I'd be opposed to that one. I like
It's just
that.
a question. I was just throwing that one out there.
Yeah, no, I think that'd be a great idea. But I think first and foremost, like what could feasibly happen is, and I think is kind of happening, is rewrite caregiver laws and create an industry for caregivers where they can actually do their job.
How about that? Justin, I want to wind this down right here. I always give my guests the last word. So I'd like to open the end up for you. I've got nothing else. We've come to the end of my list. I want to thank you for your time so much, dude. This has been fantastic. And I'm going to give you the last word, and then I'm going to go take a leak and get ready for Trev Shell.
Yeah, I mean, last little bits to cover. You know, I'd like to repeat that keeping things as spread out through this industry as possible and interacting with as many different businesses as possible as a business is going to be, in my opinion, best for you and best for me and best for everybody. Let's see a really collaborative industry and let's see what we can all do together. You know, I'm looking forward to working with as many growers as I possibly can. So please, guys, reach out. Looking forward to see what you got.
Fucking A. All right. Great place to leave it. Justin Massie, Low Key Alchemy Consulting. Great name, by the way. Low Key Alchemy. It rhymes a little.
Low key, it's just alchemy.
I thank you so much for your time, man. And I wish you the best of luck. Keep me posted. I feel like we may have a follow-up down the road.
Looking forward to it, man. Enjoy the rest of the day. Good luck with the next interview.
Or whatever, Spock. Yeah.
Live long and prosper.